uncovering the biggest secret of the century, a hidden royal family living in plain sight. A bold journalist named Ella stumbles across an anonymous tip that leads her to Alex, a man with piercing gray eyes, a guarded past, and a jaw-dropping legacy. He's the last Romanov, but she never expected that her career and heart hang in the balance. Will Ella expose the truth to the world, or will she risk it all to protect the man she's falling for? I'm your host, Josh, and it's an absolute pleasure to share this story with you. Ella Monroe had seen her fair share of bizarre story leads. From alleged UFO sightings to the time she spent 2 weeks investigating a man who swore his cat was a reincarnated medieval knight. Strange tips were part of the job. But this one, an anonymous note suggesting that an elusive royal family was hiding right in Manhattan, this was on another level. She clutched the note, her thoughts racing. What would a royal family be hiding from? And why here, of all places? Sure, New York was big, crowded, and capable of swallowing secrets whole. But royals, they couldn't stay hidden forever. So, here she was, pacing down Fifth Avenue on a chilly morning, clutching her notebook and glancing around like some over-caffeinated detective. She'd only meant to do a little preliminary investigating, but her heart was pounding as though she were on the verge of something monumental. Ella stopped in front of a high, ivy-covered gate, squinting at the mansion behind it. The place was grand yet quiet, tucked away in a way that almost dared passers-by to ignore it. It was exactly the kind of place where someone would hide, unmarked, with the kind of discreet elegance that whispered money, but shied away from fame. A flicker of movement at one of the mansion's windows caught her eye. For a moment, she thought she saw a shadow pass by, a figure moving with quiet precision. She leaned in, trying to catch another glimpse, her pulse quickening as curiosity took hold. Who was inside? Taking a deep breath, Ella approached the gate and pressed the buzzer, her mind racing with questions. She'd planned on this just being a warm-up to her investigation, maybe jot down a few impressions, but with every passing second, she felt herself getting pulled deeper in. Yes? A low, smooth voice crackled over the speaker, polite, but with a tone that implied he didn't often receive unexpected visitors. Ella cleared her throat, fighting to keep her voice steady. "Hi, I'm Ella Monroe. I'm a journalist with the New York Inquirer, and I was wondering if I might speak with..." The line went dead. Ella blinked at the speaker, her jaw dropping slightly. Well, that was a first. She'd been brushed off by sources before, sure, but not quite so curtly. Fumbling for her notebook, she pretended to be utterly absorbed in a nearby rosebush, as though meticulously documenting the plant life outside was her real assignment. And that's when she saw him. He was watching her from just inside the gate, arms folded, his posture relaxed but with a look that was anything but casual. He was tall, with dark hair brushed back in an almost annoyingly flawless way, dressed in a perfectly tailored suit that whispered old-world elegance. But what struck her most were his eyes, gray and piercing, with a guarded intensity that made her feel as though he'd sized her up with one glance. She scrambled to look nonchalant, offering him her most professional smile. "Good morning. I was, just admiring the architecture." He raised an eyebrow, and she got the impression he didn't quite believe her. "Is that so?" "Yes," she replied. And then, because something about him made her feel like she'd already lost control of the situation, she added, "Is there a rule against admiring private residences in this neighborhood?" The corner of his mouth quirked, but his eyes remained unreadable. "Not a rule, no. Though I'd say your enthusiasm for, shall we say, personal property, is rather unique." "Oh, I'm full of questions," she replied breezily, knowing she was on thin ice but unwilling to back down. "It's sort of my job." His gaze shifted slightly, something flickering in his expression, something that might have been amusement or maybe mild exasperation. "Ah, yes. The journalist." He paused, his voice cool and controlled. "Should I be flattered by your interest, or concerned?" Ella leaned in slightly, holding his gaze. "That depends. Do you have something to hide?" He let out a small, dry laugh, almost as if she'd said something charmingly naive. "Everyone has something to hide, Ms. Monroe, but I suspect you know that." She wasn't quite sure how to respond, caught off guard by the unexpected depth in his words. There was a strange tension in the air, an unspoken understanding that he wasn't just some man with an expensive house. No, he was hiding something much bigger than that. "So," she said finally, struggling to sound casual, Are you going to give me a hint? Something to satisfy my journalistic curiosity? He smiled, though it didn't reach his eyes. If I did, Ms. Monroe, what would be left for you to uncover? With that, he turned and walked away, leaving her standing by the gate, both flustered and intrigued. She watched as he disappeared inside, feeling a rush of frustration mingled with anticipation. He'd just dismissed her, cool as anything, yet she couldn't shake the feeling that he'd let her see something, just a sliver of the truth, wrapped up in guarded words and unreadable looks. Later, back in the newsroom, when Ella walked into the office, Vincent, her editor, looked up from his desk with a smug grin. "Well, did you meet our mystery man?" She sighed, collapsing into a chair across from him. "I saw him, yes. He's interesting." Vincent chuckled, steepling his fingers. "Interesting doesn't sell newspapers, Monroe. What did you get?" "Not much yet," she admitted, her mind racing back over the encounter. "But he's definitely hiding something." Vincent leaned back, giving her a look that was part challenge, part expectation. "Then dig deeper. Find out who he is and what he's hiding. A secret royal family living in New York? If it's true, it's our golden ticket." Ella nodded, feeling a thrill of anticipation as she glanced at her notes. She'd sensed something in Alex's gaze, something he'd tried to keep hidden, but not quite successfully. And for the first time in her career, she felt a strange, personal pull toward a story, as though she wasn't just chasing a scoop, but stepping into something far more mysterious and profound. And that's how, as she stared at her notes, she found herself already planning her next move. Because even if she didn't fully understand it yet, she knew this story was going to change everything. The next morning, Ella found herself back outside the mansion's ivy-covered gate, clutching her notebook and rehearsing a dozen ways to seem casual. Yesterday had been intriguing. But the more she thought about it, the more her curiosity tangled with the nagging suspicion that her mystery man was hiding something big. Maybe something important enough to explain why he brushed her off so coolly. As she reached the gate, her eyes traveled over the massive stone walls and the grand old oak tree in the yard. He'd been right. People didn't normally come knocking on a mansion's door asking questions. And yet here she was again, her heart pounding as she considered her next move. Just as she was about to press the buzzer, the gate swung open, startling her. Standing there, with his arms folded and a raised eyebrow, was Alex. "Back so soon, Ms. Monroe?" he asked, his voice carrying that same smooth, polite tone that somehow managed to convey a quiet warning. She gave him a bright, practiced smile. "Good morning. Just out for a walk. I thought I'd stop by and, appreciate the architecture." He looked around, as if inspecting his own mansion to determine whether it was truly worth such admiration. "Is that so?" "Yep," she replied, her smile widening. And then, because his cool, unreadable look was starting to make her feel like a schoolgirl in trouble with the headmaster, she added, "Is there a rule against admiring rich people's mansions in this neighborhood?" One corner of his mouth lifted, but his eyes remained serious, their cool gray depths giving nothing away. "Not a rule, no. But one might wonder why a journalist would find such architecture interesting enough to pay it a second visit." Touché. Ella could feel her cheeks heating up, but she refused to let him have the upper hand. "I don't know. Maybe I was hoping you'd give me a hint about your mysterious life in this mansion." "Ah," he said, nodding thoughtfully. "You're here to solve a mystery, then." He gave her an almost pitying look, as if she'd just admitted to chasing after something impossible. But there was a spark of humor in his eyes, one that made her feel both irritated and intrigued. She couldn't tell if he was amused by her persistence, or simply enjoying the game. "Maybe," she replied, tilting her head in challenge. "Are you planning to give me one?" He sighed, looking past her as though considering something, then met her gaze. "Everyone has their secrets, Ms. Monroe. The difference is, some of us prefer they stay that way." His words struck her, cutting through the playful tone with a hint of warning. She opened her mouth to respond, but before she could, he turned, walking away without so much as a goodbye. This man was more frustrating than any story she'd chased before. But even as she watched him retreat, her journalistic instincts flared, sensing she was closer to something significant. His eyes, calm and guarded as they were, had shown a hint of something else. Caution? Longing? She couldn't be sure. But one thing was certain. He wasn't just playing a game. Back in the newsroom later that day, By the time Ella returned to the office, her head was spinning with thoughts of Alex. She barely noticed Vincent smirking from behind his desk until he spoke. "Let me guess," he said, eyes gleaming. "Prince Charming still isn't talking?" Ella sighed, sinking into her chair. "Not exactly. But there's something about him, Vincent. I don't know what it is yet, but he's hiding something." Vincent chuckled, steepling his fingers in that infuriating way he did whenever he smelled a story. "You've got that look, Monroe. Don't tell me you're getting soft on this guy." "Soft?" She shook her head, feigning offense. "I'm a professional, Vincent. It's called persistence." He raised an eyebrow, clearly amused. "Well, keep being persistent then, because if there's a real royal story here, you're going to be the one to break it." As he walked away, Ella sank deeper into her chair, her thoughts drifting back to Alex's cool, guarded expression, his refusal to reveal anything about himself. This was more than a story now. She couldn't explain it, but she felt drawn to him, as though each encounter revealed a little more of the truth he was so determined to hide. The following afternoon, outside the mansion, Ella returned to the mansion with a renewed sense of determination, her mind spinning with questions she couldn't shake. The fact that she'd barely slept the night before didn't help either, but there was no way she could stay away. She needed to know who Alex really was and what he was hiding. This time, she didn't even have to press the buzzer. The gate opened just as she reached it, and Alex was waiting for her, arms folded, his expression a mixture of amusement and exasperation. "You're persistent. I'll give you that," he said, sounding more resigned than irritated. "What can I say? Persistence is in my job description," she replied, a hint of a smirk tugging at her lips. "So, are you going to let me in on your secret, or are we going to keep playing this game?" He let out a soft sigh, glancing around the garden. "You want answers, Ms. Monroe, but sometimes the answers are more trouble than they're worth." She studied him carefully, her curiosity deepening. "Is that what you believe? That secrets are better left hidden?" His expression shifted slightly, a flash of something almost like vulnerability crossing his face before he caught himself. "Sometimes, yes, but other times," he looked away, as though struggling with something. "Other times, secrets protect us." They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of his words sinking in, and for the first time, Ella felt a twinge of something unexpected: sympathy. It wasn't just a game for him. Whatever he was hiding, it was more than just a choice. It was a burden. "So, are you planning on keeping all your secrets?" she asked, her voice softer than she'd intended. His eyes flicked back to hers, a hint of surprise in his expression. And for a brief moment, she saw something unguarded in his gaze, something almost hopeful. "That depends," he replied, his tone lighter, though his expression was still thoughtful. "Are you planning to keep asking?" She smiled, feeling a strange warmth despite the guardedness between them. "Maybe, as long as you keep giving me a reason to." He chuckled softly, the sound wrapping around her, warm and comforting in a way she hadn't expected. "Then I suppose we'll be seeing more of each other." As they parted, Ella felt a strange mix of excitement and caution. This wasn't just about the story anymore, and she knew it. Whatever was between them was something deeper, something that was just beginning to reveal itself. And as she walked away, her heart racing, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the start. The library was supposed to close at 9, but Ella was still there hours later, her desk piled with books and her third cup of cold coffee. Her eyes skimmed over each page, searching for anything that might explain Alex's mysterious life. She hadn't found much, just hints and half-truths about royal families scattered across Europe, noble bloodlines stretching back centuries. But her instincts told her she was close. Somewhere in these dusty pages, a secret was waiting to be unearthed. And yet, as she turned the pages, she found herself wondering if she even wanted to know the truth. She'd come to New York for her career, driven by ambition and a fierce determination to be the best. But this story, Alex, was different. She felt a pull toward him that had nothing to do with fame or success, a curiosity that went beyond the mystery. And with every glance, every guarded smile he'd given her, she felt herself drawn deeper into his world. Still, she knew that once she found the truth, there would be no going back. Her career, her integrity as a journalist, even her connection with Alex, all of it was tangled up in a decision she wasn't sure she was ready to make. Just as she was beginning to lose hope, her eyes landed on a name written in small, faded script. Romanov. Her pulse quickened as she scanned the page, piecing together a family tree that stretched back centuries. She knew the name, of course. Everyone did. The Romanovs, the last imperial family of Russia. Most of them had perished during the revolution, their lives ending in tragedy. But there were rumors, stories of secret survivors hidden away by sympathizers, children who'd escaped the massacre and lived out their lives in exile. And there, at the very end of one branch, almost hidden in the shadows, was the name Alexei. Her heart stopped. Could it be him? Could Alex be a Romanov? A prince in hiding? The last descendant of a lost dynasty? The possibility filled her with both excitement and dread. She'd been chasing a story, but now she realized she'd found something bigger than she'd ever expected. If this was true, if Alex was the last Romanov, she was standing on the edge of a revelation that could change her life and his forever. She sat back, her mind racing with questions. She had everything she needed to go public. With one article, she could break the story that would launch her career. But as she thought of Alex, his quiet reserve, the way he'd looked at her with that guarded trust, she felt a pang of guilt. He'd let her into his world, and now she was about to betray him. Her phone buzzed, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from Vincent. Any luck with the royal ghost? She typed back slowly. Found something. Need a little more time. Then, after a long pause, she added, "He's different than I expected." She put her phone down, staring at the screen as if it held the answers she so desperately needed. Because in that moment, she realized the truth. This wasn't just a story anymore. She was caught between her ambition and her loyalty to Alex. And no matter what choice she made, there would be consequences. The following afternoon, outside the mansion. The next day, Ella couldn't resist the urge to see Alex. She needed to know if what she'd discovered was true, needed to hear it from him. Maybe, if he trusted her enough to confirm it, she'd find a way to balance her career and the connection they'd built. When she arrived at the gate, Alex was waiting, his expression calm but watchful. He led her through the garden in silence, and they walked together until they reached a secluded terrace overlooking the city skyline. For a long time, they stood without speaking, the quiet stretching between them, filled with all the questions she couldn't bring herself to ask. Finally, she gathered her courage. "Alex, I think I've figured out who you are." He didn't look at her, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I suspected you would." Her heart pounded, and she fought to keep her voice steady. Are you really a Romanov?" He was silent for a moment, then nodded, a faint, sad smile playing at his lips. "Yes, Ella. My family has lived in hiding for generations, moving from place to place, always one step ahead of those who might wish to exploit us." His words hit her like a blow, and she felt the weight of the truth settling over her. Alex wasn't just a man with a secret. He was a legacy, a symbol of a lost empire, a living reminder of a history long buried. "But why keep it a secret?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why hide?" He looked at her, his eyes filled with a sadness she hadn't seen before. "Because the world doesn't see people like us, Ella. It sees symbols, relics of a past that's long gone. My family, my life, would become nothing more than a spectacle, and I won't let that happen." Her throat tightened, and she felt the sting of tears threatening to spill over, because she understood in that moment the burden he carried, the weight of a history he could never escape. He looked away, his voice softer. "I don't expect you to understand, but I hope you know that the life I've chosen, the secrecy, it's not out of pride. It's to protect what little we have left." They stood there in silence, the weight of his words settling between them, and she felt her heart break a little more. She'd been chasing a story, but now she realized that she was holding his life, his legacy, in her hands. And no matter what choice she made, someone would lose. "Alex," she whispered, reaching out to take his hand. "I'm sorry. I never meant to hurt you." He looked down at their joined hands, his gaze softening. "I know, Ella, and I appreciate your honesty. It's more than I expected." For a long moment, they stood together, their hands entwined, a quiet understanding passing between them. She knew, in that moment, that she'd never truly be able to separate her heart from the story. And as much as she hated it, she knew that whatever decision she made, it would change both of their lives forever. Finally, She pulled away, her heart heavy. "I need time to think, Alex. I need to figure out what I'm going to do." He nodded, his expression resigned but understanding. "Take all the time you need, Ella. I'll be here." As she walked away, she felt a sense of loss settle over her, a hollow ache that left her feeling more alone than ever. She'd found the truth, but now she was faced with a decision that could shatter everything she'd built, and everything they'd shared. The next few days passed in a blur, and each one ended with Ella finding herself back outside the mansion. She tried to tell herself it was part of her investigation, that spending time with Alex would help her understand his story. But deep down, she knew the truth. She wanted to see him, not as a journalist chasing a lead, but as a woman caught up in something that felt both thrilling and impossible. Today, she approached the mansion with her heart racing, trying to convince herself that this was just another visit, just another day. But when she saw Alex standing by the gate, his hands in his pockets and a small, knowing smile on his lips, she felt her resolve slipping away. "Good afternoon, Ms. Monroe," he said, his voice warm but laced with the same guarded caution he wore like armor. She smiled, trying to keep her tone light. "I hope I'm not intruding on your daily routine." He chuckled, shaking his head. "Not at all. You've become something of a habit, I suppose." They walked together through the garden, falling into step with an ease that felt oddly natural. As they strolled, Alex pointed out small details she hadn't noticed before. The way the light hit the fountain at dusk, the delicate flowers his mother had planted years ago. Each story, each memory, felt like a glimpse into his world, a world he'd kept hidden for so long. Finally, they reached a secluded corner of the garden, shaded by towering trees and filled with the quiet hum of birdsong. They sat on a weathered stone bench, and for a few moments, neither of them spoke. The silence between them felt comfortable, familiar, and Ella found herself leaning into it, letting go of the questions and doubts that had haunted her since that night in the library. "Alex," she said finally, her voice barely a whisper, "why did you let me in? Why tell me your secret?" He looked at her, his gray eyes reflecting the soft light filtering through the trees. "I suppose I've spent so long hiding that I wanted to know what it felt like to be seen, to be understood, even just by one person." His words struck her, and she felt her heart ache with a strange, bittersweet sadness, because she knew what he was asking, what he was risking by letting her into his life. And she knew that, despite her best intentions, she'd brought a new kind of danger into his world. They sat in silence for a while, watching as the sunlight danced through the leaves. Ella felt a strange mix of emotions: gratitude for the trust he'd shown her, guilt for the secrets she still held, and a growing warmth that made her heart race. She wanted to say something, to tell him that he wasn't alone, that she understood his fears. But instead she found herself asking the question that had been weighing on her mind for days. "Do you ever regret it?" she asked softly. "The life you've chosen?" He sighed, looking away as though gathering his thoughts. "Sometimes. There are days when I wonder what it would be like to live openly, to be free of all this secrecy. But then I remember the responsibility I carry. My family, our legacy. It's not something I can abandon, no matter how much I might want to." His words hung in the air, and she felt a pang of sympathy, a quiet understanding of the burden he carried. Because she knew, deep down, that her life would never truly fit with his, that no matter how close they grew, there would always be a distance between them, a line she couldn't cross. But as they sat together in the quiet of the garden, she realized that, for the first time in her career, she didn't care about the story. She didn't care about the fame, the recognition. All she cared about was the man beside her, the guarded, gentle man who had trusted her with his secret. Come that evening, back at her apartment, Ella stared at the notes scattered across her table, her mind swirling with questions and doubts. She'd spent years building her career, chasing stories that would make her name, stories that would prove she belonged. But now, as she looked at the details she'd gathered on Alex, she felt a strange sense of emptiness, a hollow ache that left her questioning everything she'd once believed. She picked up her pen, staring at the blank page in front of her. Normally, she'd be writing an outline, crafting the first draft of an article. But tonight, the words wouldn't come. Because this time, the story was more than just facts and details. This time, the story had a heartbeat, a face, and a quiet, cautious smile that had somehow become part of her life. She let out a shaky breath, realizing that she was caught between two worlds, one of ambition and recognition, and one of trust, loyalty, and love. And no matter what choice she made, she knew that someone would be left behind. Her phone buzzed, and she glanced at the screen to see a message from Vincent. "Any progress on our royal mystery?" She typed back slowly, "Still working on it." Then, after a long pause, she added, "It's complicated." Because it was complicated, in a way she'd never experienced before. And as she lay in bed that night, staring at the ceiling, she felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her. A quiet but unyielding reminder that the time was running out. The next day, back at the mansion, she returned to the mansion the next afternoon, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what she had to do. She needed to be honest with him, to tell him that she was struggling, that her loyalty to him was battling her loyalty to her career. She needed him to understand, even if it meant risking the fragile connection they'd built. Alex met her by the gate, his expression as calm and guarded as ever. But as she approached, she saw a flicker of something in his eyes, a hint of worry, or perhaps a quiet anticipation. They walked in silence, winding through the garden until they reached the familiar stone bench beneath the trees. He looked at her, his gaze steady but questioning. "Ella, is something wrong?" She took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "Alex, I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to balance my career, my ambition, with what I feel for you." His expression softened, a faint, sad smile tugging at his lips. "I never wanted to put you in this position, Ella. I never wanted to be the reason you had to choose. But you are," she said quietly, her voice thick with emotion. "You are the reason. And as much as I want to keep your secret, to protect you, I don't know if I can let go of everything I've worked for. I don't know if I can choose." He looked down, his hand brushing hers in a gesture of quiet understanding. "Then don't choose, Ella. Not yet. Just be here, with me." She felt a warmth spread through her, a quiet sense of peace that eased the tension in her heart. Because for now, that was enough. For now, she could let go of the questions, the doubts, and simply enjoy the quiet beauty of the garden, the warmth of his hand in hers. And as they sat together, the sun dipping below the trees, she realized that maybe, just maybe, she could have both, a career and a love worth fighting for. Because with Alex, she was learning that some things, some choices, were worth the risk. Ella had read through countless royal genealogies over the past week, but tonight felt different. As she pored over yet another dusty book in the quiet library, she sensed that she was on the verge of something significant, something that would make everything clear. Hours passed, and Ella's coffee had gone cold. She was surrounded by stacks of books and pages of notes, each one filled with carefully recorded names, dates, and events that stretched back centuries. Her eyes burned from reading, but she couldn't stop, because somewhere in these faded pages lay the answer she was seeking. Somewhere in this mess of history was the truth about Alex. She flipped another page, her gaze landing on a name written in small, faded letters. Romanov. Her pulse quickened. She knew the name, of course. The Romanovs, the last imperial family of Russia, swept away by revolution. Most of them had perished, their lives ending in tragedy. But over the years, rumors had persisted. Stories of survivors hidden away by sympathizers, children smuggled to safety in the dead of night. It was a fantasy, a legend. Yet here, on the very edge of the family tree, she saw the name Alexei. Her eyes skimmed over the faint notes beside it, piecing together fragments of a story almost erased by time. And with each word, her heart pounded harder. Alexei Romanov. Could it really be him? Could the man she'd been spending her days with, sharing quiet moments in a garden, be the last remaining link to the Romanovs? A thrill shot through her, followed by a wave of dread. This was it. The discovery that would make her career, the kind of story that journalists dreamed of. She had the chance to reveal something historic, to bring a hidden legacy into the light. With one article, she could cement her place as a serious investigative journalist. But as she stared at the name, a nagging doubt crept in. This wasn't just a story. This was Alex. Gentle, cautious Alex, who'd let her into his life, who'd trusted her when he trusted no one else. She thought of his words, the way he'd talked about his life as if it were a burden, a responsibility, and she realized, with a painful clarity, that publishing this story would mean destroying everything he'd worked to protect. She leaned back, feeling the weight of the choice pressing down on her. She'd always prided herself on her ambition, on her drive to succeed. But now, for the first time, she found herself questioning what success really meant. Her phone buzzed, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from Vincent. "Ready to make history, Monroe?" She typed back slowly, her hands trembling. "I have it, but I need to think." She put down her phone, feeling the guilt twist in her stomach, because she knew what Vincent would say, that she was getting too close, that she was letting her feelings cloud her judgment. And maybe he was right, but she also knew that once she made this choice, there would be no going back. Taking a deep breath, she stood, gathering her things and making her way back to her apartment. She'd confront Alex tomorrow. She needed to hear the truth from him, needed to see his face and understand what she was truly risking. Because this wasn't just a story anymore, it was her heart. The following afternoon, at the mansion. The next day, Ella found herself back at the mansion, her heart pounding as she made her way up the stone path. She knew she was on the verge of something monumental, something that would change both of their lives. But as she looked up at the grand facade of the mansion, she felt a surge of doubt. Because if she went through with this, if she asked him the question she'd been dreading, there was no telling what his answer might bring. She didn't have to press the buzzer this time. The gate was already open, and Alex was waiting for her by the garden, his face calm but guarded, as if he knew exactly why she'd come. Without a word, he led her to the terrace where they'd talked before, and they sat down in silence, the unspoken truth hanging between them like a fragile thread. She watched him, taking in the quiet strength in his expression, the way he held himself with a dignity she'd never seen before. And for a moment, she almost lost her nerve. But she couldn't walk away now. She needed to know, needed to hear it from him. "Alex," she began softly, her voice steady but trembling. I found something. About you." He didn't look surprised. Instead, he sighed, gazing out over the city with an expression that was both weary and accepting. "I knew this day would come," he said quietly. "I just didn't expect it so soon." Her heart ached, torn between her loyalty to him and her loyalty to the truth. Are you really a Romanov?" He nodded slowly, the faintest hint of sadness in his eyes. "Yes, my family. We've been in hiding for generations, moving from place to place, always one step ahead of those who would exploit us." The words hit her with a force she hadn't expected, and she felt a rush of guilt and shame. She'd spent her career chasing stories, pursuing ambition with a single-minded focus. But now, faced with the reality of Alex's life, the weight of his family's legacy, she realized that this was more than just a headline. This was his life. "But why keep it a secret?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "Why hide?" He gave her a sad smile, one filled with years of regret and quiet determination. "Because, Ella, if people knew, if they knew who I was, they'd turn my life into a spectacle. They'd see me as a relic, a symbol of something long dead. And I won't let that happen." His words struck her, cutting through her doubts and fears. And as she looked at him, really looked at him, she understood the burden he carried. Because this wasn't just about hiding. It was about protecting something fragile, something that couldn't survive the harsh light of fame. They sat in silence, each lost in their own thoughts, and she felt the weight of her decision pressing down on her. She'd come here for the truth, and now that she had it, she wasn't sure she could go through with her story. Because no matter what she chose, someone would lose. Finally, she looked down, her voice thick with emotion. "I'm sorry, Alex. I never wanted to make things harder for you." He reached out, his hand warm and comforting as it closed over hers. "I know, Ella, and I appreciate your honesty. It's more than I expected." They stayed like that for a while, hands entwined, and for the first time, she felt the full weight of her choice. She could break his trust and launch her career, or she could let go of the story and keep his secret safe. And as she looked into his eyes, she knew that no matter what choice she made, her life would never be the same. After a long moment, she pulled her hand away, standing up with a heavy heart. I need time to think, Alex. I need to figure out what I'm going to do." He nodded, his gaze soft but resigned. "Take all the time you need, Ella. I'll be here." As she walked away, the weight of her choice settled over her, an impossible decision that left her feeling more alone than ever. And as she looked back one last time, seeing him standing there in the garden, watching her go, she knew that no matter what she chose, someone would be lost. Ella paced her apartment, her phone clutched in her hand, her mind racing. She glanced around at the stacks of notes and books scattered on her table, reminders of the story she'd been building piece by piece. And yet, despite all the work she'd put into it, she couldn't bring herself to write a single line. The truth of who Alex was lay heavy on her heart. She had the story, everything she needed to break the news of the last Romanov. But she couldn't shake the look in his eyes when he'd confirmed his identity, the quiet sadness in his voice when he'd told her of his family's hidden life. Publishing this story would change everything, for both of them. Her phone buzzed, breaking her thoughts. It was a message from Vincent. "Can I get a preview? We're ready to go whenever you are." She stared at the screen, feeling her stomach twist. Vincent didn't know Alex, didn't understand the fragile, complex person behind the royal title. To him, Alex was just another headline, another step toward the success they'd both been chasing. But to her, he was more than that. She took a deep breath and dialed Vincent's number. He answered on the second ring, his voice sharp and impatient. "Well, did you get the confirmation?" "Yes," she replied, her voice barely above a whisper. "He's a Romanov. He's been hiding his whole life." There was a pause, then a slow, almost gleeful laugh. "You did it, Monroe. This is going to be huge. So, what are you waiting for?" Ella swallowed hard, forcing herself to keep her voice steady. "Vincent, it's complicated. He trusted me. If I go public with this, I'll be betraying everything he's shared with me." "Betraying him?" Vincent scoffed. "He's just a source, Ella. And you're a journalist. Your job isn't to protect him, it's to tell the truth. This is the kind of story that could make your career, the kind people wait their whole lives for." "I know," she said, fighting the growing sense of dread in her chest. "But I can't ignore what it would do to him. He's lived his life in hiding for a reason. This story, it would ruin everything he's tried to protect." Vincent's voice hardened. "Then maybe you're not cut out for this, Monroe. If you can't handle the pressure, I'll find someone who can." The threat was as clear as it was cold, and it cut through her like a knife. She'd worked so hard, sacrificed so much to get to this point. She was right on the brink of everything she'd ever wanted. And yet, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was about to lose something far more valuable. "Fine," she said, her voice hollow. "Give me 48 hours. I'll figure it out." He hung up without another word, leaving her alone in the quiet of her apartment. She stared at her phone, the weight of her choice pressing down on her. 48 hours. That was all the time she had to decide between her ambition and her heart. The next day, back at the mansion, Ella couldn't stay away. By the next afternoon, she found herself back at the mansion, her heart heavy with doubt and guilt. She knew she had to talk to Alex, had to tell him the truth about her struggle. She needed him to understand, even if it meant risking everything they'd built. When she arrived, the gate was open, as if he'd been expecting her. She found him in the garden, standing by the fountain, his expression calm but wary. He looked up as she approached, his gaze searching her face as if trying to read the answer before she'd even spoken. They stood in silence for a moment, the weight of her choice settling between them like an unspoken question. Finally, she took a deep breath, gathering her thoughts. "Alex," she began, her voice soft but steady. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to choose between what I feel for you and everything I've worked for." He nodded, his expression resigned. "I never wanted to put you in this position, Ella. I never wanted to be the reason you had to choose. But you are," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "You are the reason. And as much as I want to protect you, to keep your secret safe, I don't know if I can let go of my career, of everything I've built." He looked down, his hand brushing hers in a gesture of quiet understanding. "Ella, I know what you've sacrificed to keep my secret, and I'll never forget that. But you have to make this choice for yourself. I can't tell you what to do." They stood in silence, his hand warm against hers, and she felt the tears prick at the corners of her eyes. She'd thought she could balance both, that she could somehow find a way to protect Alex without losing herself. But now, faced with the reality of her choice, she knew it was impossible. Finally, she looked up, meeting his gaze with a mixture of sorrow and determination. I think I have to choose you, Alex. Because if I publish this story, if I betray you, I don't know if I'll ever be able to live with myself. His expression softened, a faint, relieved smile tugging at his lips. Thank you, Ella. They stood together in silence, the weight of her choice settling between them like a quiet promise. And in that moment, she felt a strange sense of peace, a calm that came from knowing she'd done the right thing, even if it meant letting go of her dreams. After a moment, he reached out, brushing a stray tear from her cheek. I won't forget what you've done for me, Ella. I won't forget you. The words hit her like a blow, and she felt a surge of grief and gratitude, a bittersweet mix of emotions that left her feeling both whole and shattered, because she knew, deep down, that this was goodbye, that their worlds, their lives, were too different to ever truly come together. Goodbye, Alex, she whispered, her voice barely above a breath. He gave her one last, lingering look, then stepped back, his hand slipping from hers. And as she turned to leave, she felt a quiet strength settle over her, a sense of peace that came from knowing she'd made the right choice. As she walked away from the mansion, her heart heavy with both loss and relief, she knew that no matter what came next, she would carry this moment, this choice, with her forever. Ella barely slept after her conversation with Alex. Her decision to protect his secret had left her both relieved and heartbroken, and she couldn't shake the feeling that she'd lost something precious. She'd made the right choice. She knew that. But the cost felt heavier than she'd expected. Finally, after days of restlessness, she couldn't bear it any longer. She picked up her phone, typed out a single tentative line, and hit send before she could change her mind. Can we talk? Minutes passed, each one stretching longer than the last. Just as she was about to give up, her phone buzzed. Alex's reply was simple, but it made her heart skip all the same. Meet me at the garden. Tomorrow, sunset. The next evening, Ella arrived at the mansion as the sun was setting, casting a golden light over the garden. The gate was open, and she made her way to the terrace with a strange mixture of hope and dread. She didn't know what to expect, whether he'd forgive her, whether their connection could survive the choices they'd made. Alex was waiting by the fountain, his expression softened by the evening light. He looked up as she approached, his gaze steady and warm. For a long moment they simply looked at each other, the silence stretching between them like an unspoken question. Finally, she gathered her courage. Alex, I know I put you in an impossible position, and I just wanted to say, I'm sorry. He was silent, studying her face with an intensity that made her heart ache. Ella, you sacrificed so much to protect my secret. I know what it cost you, and I'll always be grateful for that. His words filled her with a quiet warmth, a gentle reassurance that eased the tension in her heart. She'd been waiting for his forgiveness, hoping that her choice had mattered. And now, in his soft gaze and steady voice, she felt that forgiveness wrap around her, a relief that left her feeling both grateful and vulnerable. They stood together, hand in hand, as the sun dipped lower, casting a warm glow over the garden. In that moment, everything else, the doubts, the regrets, the tension, faded away, leaving only the quiet understanding between them. Ella, he said quietly, his voice steady, but filled with something that felt like hope. I've spent my whole life hiding, always holding people at arm's length because I was afraid of what they'd see, afraid of losing what little I have. But with you, it's different. I don't want to hide from you. Her heart swelled at his words, and she felt a strange, fragile joy rising within her. She knew it wouldn't be easy, that there would be challenges, secrets to protect, and the weight of his family's legacy hanging over them. But in that moment, she knew that it was worth it, that whatever lay ahead, they could face it together. She met his gaze, a gentle smile on her lips. Then don't hide, Alex. Not from me. He smiled, a real, genuine smile that reached his eyes, and for the first time, she felt as though she were seeing the true Alex, the man behind the title, behind the careful mask. They stood there in the fading light, their hands entwined, the quiet understanding between them stronger than any words could convey. Sue, later, in the mansion. After their quiet reconciliation, Alex led her through the grand halls of the mansion, down a winding corridor she'd never seen before. He opened a door at the end of the hall, revealing a small library lined with old books, the scent of leather and paper filling the air. "This was my mother's favorite place," he said, glancing around the room with a soft, nostalgic smile. "She used to read to me here when I was a child, telling me stories of our family, of the life we'd left behind. She taught me to treasure it, even if we could never go back." Ella looked around, taking in the warmth of the room, the sense of history that lingered in every corner. "It's beautiful, Alex. Like a piece of your past, preserved." He nodded, his expression thoughtful. "And now it's yours too, if you want it." His words took her by surprise, filling her with a warmth that spread through her chest. She knew what he was offering, a place in his world, a chance to share the life he'd hidden for so long. And even as the weight of that choice settled over her, she felt a fierce joy rising within her, a sense of belonging she hadn't realized she'd been missing. "I want it," she said softly, meeting his gaze with a quiet certainty. "I want you." He reached out, brushing a stray lock of hair from her face, his touch gentle and familiar. And in that moment, Ella knew that she'd found something she hadn't been searching for. A place to belong, a man to trust, a love worth fighting for. They stood together, wrapped in the quiet warmth of the library, and as the night deepened around them, Ella felt a sense of peace settle over her. A quiet promise that, no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. The invitation arrived early the next morning, handwritten on thick, elegant stationery. Ella opened the envelope carefully, her heart racing as she read the note inside. "Join us for dinner. 7 p.m. A." It was from Alex. The invitation seemed simple, but she knew what it meant. This wasn't just a dinner. It was an introduction, a step into Alex's world, the one he'd guarded so fiercely. Tonight, she'd meet his family. Tonight, she'd truly see what her place in his life could be. That evening, Ella arrived at the mansion just before 7, her nerves a fluttering mix of anticipation and anxiety. She'd chosen her dress carefully, a simple yet elegant sapphire blue gown that made her feel both confident and herself. As she approached the grand entrance, she caught sight of Alex waiting for her at the top of the steps, his eyes lighting up as he saw her. "You look beautiful," he said softly, offering her his arm. She felt her nerves ease, just a little, as she took his arm. "Thank you. I hope I dressed appropriately?" His warm smile reassured her. "You're perfect, Ella. My family will be just as charmed by you as I am." They walked through the familiar halls, but tonight the mansion felt grander, alive with a quiet sense of ceremony. As they reached the dining room, she took a deep breath, bracing herself for what lay beyond the doors. Inside, the room was a picture of quiet elegance. A long mahogany table was set with fine china and sparkling crystal, a chandelier casting a warm, golden glow over the polished wood and dark walls. Two people sat at the far end of the table, a man and a woman, both impeccably dressed and bearing an unmistakable resemblance to Alex. His father's piercing gray eyes mirrored Alex's, while his mother's refined features held the same quiet strength. Alex led her forward, introducing her with a gentle pride that made her heart swell. "Mother, father, this is Ella." His mother offered her a gracious smile, her gaze warm and welcoming. "It's a pleasure to finally meet you, Ella. Alex has spoken so much about you." Ella felt her cheeks flush, glancing at Alex with a mix of surprise and affection. "I hope it was all good?" His father chuckled, his deep voice carrying a quiet authority. "You must be quite remarkable to earn my son's trust. That is, no small feat." There was a weight to his words, an unspoken acknowledgement of what this moment meant. Ella realized that tonight wasn't just a meeting, it was a rite of passage, a test of whether she belonged in their world. As they began their meal, conversation flowed easily, the formality softening with each story his parents shared. They spoke of Alex's childhood, of his mother's homeland, and of the family traditions they'd carried with them through years of exile. Ella listened, captivated, feeling as though she were being given glimpses into a life shaped by both privilege and sacrifice. At one point, Alex's mother leaned forward, her gaze soft but serious. "Ella, our life may seem unusual, even difficult to understand, but I hope you know that we do this to protect what's left of our family, to honor those who came before us." Ella nodded, her voice quiet but firm. "I do understand, and I promise, I'll protect your family's secret too." I would never betray Alex's trust. A look of approval passed over his mother's face, and she reached across the table to squeeze Ella's hand. Thank you, my dear. That means more than you know. As the evening wore on, Ella felt herself relaxing, the initial tension replaced by a sense of warmth and belonging. She realized, with a quiet joy, that she was being welcomed not just as a guest, but as part of Alex's family, part of the legacy they guarded so closely. And later, in the garden. After dinner, Alex led her outside, their footsteps soft on the garden path as they walked beneath the stars. They reached the terrace where they'd shared so many conversations, and he turned to her, his gaze filled with a warmth that made her heart race. "So," he said, his tone light, but his eyes serious. "How was it? Meeting my family?" She smiled, feeling the last of her nerves slip away. "They're wonderful, Alex. Kind and strong, just like you." He chuckled softly, his hand finding hers. "They don't let many people in, you know. Letting you in, it means something." She looked up at him, her heart swelling with a mix of gratitude and awe. "I know, and I'm grateful for it. For you." They stood in silence for a moment, hand in hand, the world around them quiet and still. Ella felt a deep sense of peace, a feeling of belonging that filled every corner of her heart. She knew that her life with Alex wouldn't be easy, that their journey would be filled with challenges and secrets to protect. But in that moment, she knew it was worth it. Because with Alex, she'd found something she hadn't even known she was searching for. A family, a home, a future. As if reading her thoughts, Alex leaned down, his forehead resting gently against hers. "Thank you, Ella, for being here, for choosing me." She closed her eyes, feeling the warmth of his presence, the quiet strength of his love. "I'm not going anywhere, Alex. I'm here, with you." And as they stood there, wrapped in each other's arms beneath the vastness of the night sky, Ella knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together. Because this wasn't just a moment in time. It was the beginning of a life they would build, a love rooted in trust, loyalty, and the unbreakable bond they shared. The next morning, Ella found herself back in the mansion's garden, savoring the quiet morning light filtering through the leaves. The air was crisp, filled with the scent of roses, and she breathed it in, feeling a sense of calm and belonging settle over her. This garden, this mansion, had become a sanctuary, a place where secrets were safe and trust ran deep. It was here that she'd first met Alex, and now it was the place she'd begun to think of as home. And in that moment, surrounded by the peace of the garden, she realized that this was the life she wanted, one built on loyalty, love, and the quiet strength they'd found together. She looked up as Alex stepped into the garden, a warm smile breaking across his face as he saw her. He walked over, sitting beside her on the bench, and for a while, they simply sat in silence, watching the early sunlight dance across the leaves. "Funny," he said finally, a hint of wonder in his voice. "I never thought I'd feel this way. I never thought I'd find a day where I could just be, without hiding, without secrets." She reached over, taking his hand in hers. "It's still your choice, Alex. If you want to keep this life, to protect what you have, I'll be here with you. But if you want something more, I'll be here for that too." He squeezed her hand, his expression thoughtful. "You know, my mother used to tell me that one day I'd meet someone who could see past the titles, past the history. Someone who'd love me, not for my name or what I represented. I didn't believe her, until now." Ella felt a warmth spread through her chest, her heart swelling at his words. "Maybe mothers are right about these things." He chuckled, leaning back as he looked out over the garden. "Maybe, but I think I'm ready, Ella. Ready to start living more openly, to let go of the fear, of the secrecy. I don't want to hide who I am anymore. Not from the world, and definitely not from you." She smiled, feeling a surge of pride for the man beside her. "Then let's do it, Alex. Let's build a life that's ours, on our terms." They sat in silence, the sunlight warming their faces, and Ella felt a sense of peace settle over her, a quiet joy that came from knowing they'd chosen this life together. She knew there would be challenges, that their journey wouldn't always be easy. But she also knew that with Alex, she had something rare, a love built on trust, on shared promises and dreams that ran deeper than words. After a while, they rose, deciding to take a walk through Central Park. It was a simple choice, a quiet outing that felt both ordinary and extraordinary. Walking hand in hand, they laughed and talked, blending into the crowd like any other couple, free from the weight of secrets and expectations. As they wandered through the park, Alex stopped, turning to her with a look of quiet determination. You know, this life we're choosing, it won't always be easy. There will be questions, challenges, people who might not understand. She nodded, meeting his gaze with steady resolve. I know, but I think we're strong enough to handle it. Together. A soft smile touched his lips, a look filled with the kind of trust that went beyond words. You're right. We are. They stopped by the lake, watching the gentle ripple of the water, the boats gliding lazily by. And in that moment, Ella felt a sense of contentment she hadn't known before. A feeling of home. Not in a place, but in a person, in the life they'd chosen to build together. As the sun began to set, casting a golden glow over the park, Alex turned to her, his expression serious, but filled with warmth. Ella, I want you to know, whatever happens, whatever challenges come our way, I'm here. I'm not going anywhere. She reached up, resting her hand against his cheek, her heart swelling with a love that felt both powerful and gentle, a quiet strength that had grown through every moment, every choice they'd made. I know, Alex, and neither am I. They stood there, wrapped in each other's arms as the world continued around them, a quiet promise between them, unbreakable and true. And as they walked back through the park, hand in hand, Ella felt a sense of hope, a promise of everything they'd yet to experience, all the stories they'd create together. This wasn't just the end of one chapter, it was the beginning of everything. If you liked the video, subscribe to the channel. Your subscription will show that I'm on the right path to bring you the best videos ever. Check this video out too. What happens when a burnt-out reality star gives up her fame to hide in a tiny coastal town? She thought she could leave the chaos behind. Just when Ava starts falling for the quiet local who's the complete opposite of everything she's ever known, her past threatens to destroy it all.